All right, 6 a.m. Wednesday morning. Good morning. Good morning, Rhonda. Good morning. It says you on you. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. My name is Kenny Avens. I am the claim defender. I am an insurance adjuster. I am the one that the insurance company wishes would just go away. But guess what? I'm not going anywhere. I was traveling all week. This has kind of been a real busy week this week. But every week I'm going to come here and I'm going to arm you with the knowledge that the carriers hope you don't uh, ever hear. Um, this is information that I'm going to give you just free advice. There is no legal ties at this point in time to any of us, and I'm going to read a disclaimer here shortly in reference to that. So grab your copy, grab your policy, whichever you can understand. Claim Wars is going to start right now. Good morning, Jeremy, Christian. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. All right, so the Claims Wars podcast is for educational purposes only. Nothing in this program should be taken as legal advice. Financial advice or any guarantee of any outcome listening does not create a client-adjuster relationship. Representation as a public insurance adjuster in Texas requires a signed contract under Texas Code 4102. Every policy is unique. Always consult your policy and a licensed professional. Excuse me. Listeners should read their policy carefully and consult with licensed professionals regarding specific situations. Any cases or references for the insured are for illustrated purposes only. These views expressed are solely those of the hosts, the guests, and do not represent any state or agency or regulatory. To work with me as a public adjuster in Texas, you must sign a written contract required by law. If you need help with your claim, you can call me, 830-353-2969. All right, let's get to today's episode. Oh, thank you again for all of you that have joined us. Today we're going to go over WaterMet. I've got some pretty interesting stories in reference to this. This comes straight from the trenches. This is a real claim that happened. We're going to call this basically a floor fumble is what happened. So, folks, buckle up. We're going to go through this step by step. This was a water claim, if you can picture to this. It's a kitchen, you're drinking your coffee, and then all of a sudden, underneath the island, the supply line breaks and it decides it's had enough. End of the world, the flood. This takes place, and it literally just floods the entire house. We're talking water everywhere. So you're looking at kitchen, baseboards, cabinets, pantries, dining room. It just flooded the whole lower level. Now you think that'd be a simple claim. Okay, one house, one busted line, you got a soggy homeowner. Easy math. No, the insurance company turned this into a marathon event to where the insured day reached out to me and said, hey, we don't think we're getting treated fairly. We've got, was a very nice home. They had very nice floors. They had very nice cabinets. Granite countertops, things of that nature, and they just didn't think the estimates weren't lining up with what the contractors were telling them the repairs were going to be, and that's common. That is very, very common, that they just don't line up. So they sent out an adjuster, basically with a tape measure and a dream, and somehow they managed to draw a floor plan that looked like it was done by Picasso on a roller coaster. I kid you not. I had dimensions that were just completely off. Thank you again for all y'all that have joined me. Bobby, Henry, Okie, thank you very much. So anyway, like I said, the measurements were just completely off, and that was my first notice, and that was what I brought to her attention. I said, well, the estimates aren't going to be correct because none of these rooms are measured accurately. They're all off. And so I started my measurements, and then I reached out to the insurance company, and I let them know that, the measurements were wrong, and that we needed to readdress this, and going back and forth. And then at that point in time, I also let them know that the flooring they had put down for just normal laminate, everyday flooring, and the lady had bamboo flooring, and so it was, it was quite a bit of difference. So she reaches out to me, and I'm sitting here trying to figure out how to clean up this mess, because now that this was what should have been simple, no problem, move on down the road, it has turned into, I'm $6,000-7,000 short of what I need just to put my house back to what it was. So I go in there, and they had sent out an ITAL, so I didn't quite understand, not knowing the flooring, but I got them to concede right away that the flooring was, Shane, thank you for joining us, that the flooring was high-end flooring and that they needed to adjust for that. So they did. And at that point in time, and this is where it gets tricky with the insured. Just so you know, as a public adjuster, we prefer that you not say a lot to the insurance company in reference to, especially once we've been involved, because whether you realize or not, whether you like it or not, there's procedures and questions that they are required to ask and go through step by step. And some of these will lead you into an area that where you're denied coverage based on the conversation that you're having. And so to move on down the road, so we got the floor acknowledged, and so automatically they want to reach out and say, hey, you know, this was an honest mistake. How come you didn't pick this up from the beginning? And they didn't. And so once they realized, the homeowner reached out and said, hey, you know, what can I do to move this forward? Automatically that slowed everything down. Automatically now the insurance company knows that the homeowner's talking to them. And so instead of me, and they're just trying to go back and forth. And at that point in time, they definitely tried to circumvent, me being involvement, and they've done that. Several of them have done that. They just refuse to acknowledge that you're taking charge of the claim. Bobby, good morning. Thank you. And so they'll keep sending things. I've got another gentleman, very much so, he did not want to be involved at all. And so, but even after 4 emails to the insurance company saying, please just send this back to me only, they refused. So the homeowner kept reaching out to the insurance company. Finally, I got them to stop, and we started moving forward. And I got a reinspection for them to come out. And I met with another adjuster, and he was an independent, and he was a very knowledgeable gentleman. And he actually took a disto tool, which is a measuring device. I'll show you later. Basically, it's just a laser measure. And he went room by room, step by step, and he got the rooms done. At that point in time, it was brought to the attention that the granite countertop had been cracked. And that was going to have to be added. And so we went through step by step again, step by step. And when I got his estimate back, his estimate was definitely closer, but it was still very much off in reference to getting the insured back indemnified. So I went back and forth with a couple of statutory violations that I knew that had happened, and the delays that were going on in reference, because this had been going on for months. And very nice people. And so after several months, finally the insurance company can see the measurements were wrong. Actually the material that they had wrong, and we did get as an adjuster, generally speaking, the public adjuster, we get 20 to 30% more than you would get on your own, and that's exactly how that ended up. She ended up with right at 30% more than she would have got by herself, for the simple fact that they just were not going to concede, one, that she did have high-end flooring, and two, that their measurements were wrong from their first adjuster. And I know that that's just not something it's not necessarily common, but it happens. I mean, these guys, hopefully they come out and do the best they can. But your experience is based on what it is. So I got another one. This is completely mind blowing. Okay, again, this is water mitigation. So when a water mitigation company comes out, thank you for Samantha. When a water mitigation comes out, they want to start, if it's a flood, for example, I've got one where the water faucet flooded the entire second floor. So you're talking carpeting, baseboards, drywall, you've got contents coming out, possibly, and this saturated through and was leaking to the floor below. Fortunately, the floor below where it leaked was a garage, so there wasn't a lot other than personal property. Thank you all for all that have joined. This is awesome. I do appreciate it. They had personal property. Now, the interesting thing with this was when the water mitigation company come out, and this is where this is where you need to understand you have complete autonomy over the work that goes on in your house. I don't care if the insurance company sent out their preferred vendor. I don't care. It is your home. If you feel uncomfortable at any point in time with what's going on, stop them. And get your questions answered. Why are you ripping out all this drywall in a room, that wasn't wet? And they may say, well, ma'am, it doesn't look wet. or sir, but my meter shows it is, and it's saturated to the point where we need to remove this, otherwise there's going to be a problem. Once they have that sort of documentation, it moves forward very quickly. So it's not that it's very cut and dry. But in this case scenario, what happened was they took out the carpet, they took out the contents, they packed everything up, they started taking the bathroom, and then when they took the drywall off and they started taking the ceiling off from below, they noticed that there was old rotted wood behind the wall. Automatically, the insurance company goes hands off. Most of your policies will say that you have a 14-day long-term water exclusion. So it'll say that after 14 days, if the water leak has been going on longer than 14 days, it will be excluded from the repairs. Now, the plumbing repairs generally are excluded, period. They don't cover those. Max, Layla, thank you for joining us. They generally don't cover the plumbing repairs. They don't like covering those. So they ripped out the carpet, they ripped out the drywall, they took the man's bathroom apart. They've got all of his personal belongings packed up, and now they have found rotted wood, and they went hands off. At that point in time, the mitigation company is wanting to pull out their fans, the insurance company has told them this is a long-term water leak, this is not going to be covered. And so the mitigation company at that point in time started to pull out, and they started to pull their fans off. Well, the gentleman talked them into leaving their fans, and so they did. And so he calls me and he says, "Hey, man, I was on vacation. My daughter was coming by, and she was checking on my house and feeding the animals and so on and so forth." Thank you all those that are joining us this morning, Crypto Junkie. So she came by one day, and all of a sudden there was water running out of my garage. Okay, and she calls me, and she shuts the water off, and it's leaking out of the bathroom faucet, and she doesn't know, what's going on. And she calls me, and I'm on vacation, so I come back and I say, "Hey, I got my whole second floor got flooded." I called the insurance company. They come out, they find it, and then they say this is old long-term damage, long-term. Well, for as much as I hate to say this, and I appreciate there is long-term damage there, but the leak that happened at this point in time was sudden and accidental. It was a failure from the faucet, and the gentleman still had the faucet, so that's important. Okay, so know this: when I said you had complete autonomy to what goes on in your house. At that point in time, if you don't feel comfortable with them ripping out the drywall and what have you, stop and ask the questions. You are in charge. Like I said, they got all his belongings packed up, and now he's asking about, well, if there's no coverage, what about my belongings? How much is that bill? Well, that's, that was a large number at first, and so I get involved, and I reached out to them, and I said, "Hey, where are we at? As far as this and that." Well, they weren't doing anything with any of his personal property. They weren't doing anything. They had stored it up, and they hadn't started cleaning anything, and they didn't have anything going on, and yet they're still telling him that the bill's thousands of dollars, and it's like, no, you need to return his property now. So insurance company gets a letter saying, if you're looking at a denial, you need to return his personal property. And at this point in time, it's not a denial, and I actually sent them the statutes where it showed that I get it that there was old damage. What had happened was when they did the house originally, they put a nail through the drain line, okay? And apparently over 10, maybe 15 years, it was in a higher part of the pipe. So the pipe would have had to gotten a lot of water in it for it to leak, as if you were washing your face or brushing your teeth and you were just letting the water run. It would take that kind of flow for it to come out of the little nail hole, because it wasn't a hole, it was actually a nail that had penetrated, so it has to seep through. So it's a slow, small leak. Qualls, thank you for joining us this morning. And so anyway, like I said, with the water flowing, it overpowered it, and that's what flooded the whole house. Well, unfortunately for the insurance company, they don't. Yeah, their exclusion is clear. They do not have to pay for any long-term water leak, that's been neglected, unless you have an endorsement, which they have, that says, If it's hidden between walls, which a lot of them do, it's hidden between the walls. There's no humanly way, like this case, that they could have ever known it was leaking. It wasn't leaking enough that it leaked below for them to see until the faucet failed. Once the faucet failed, now it overpowered it, and it continued. Now it's sending heavy water down, probably over several days, because it wasn't. It was just a steady stream. And so I contact the insurance company, and they say, no, this is a long-term water leak. And I'm telling them, no, we still have the faucet. That is not the case. And so we went ahead and we hooked up the faucet, and we ran a test, and we showed them to where it wouldn't shut off because we still had the vanity. Always keep the part that caused the problem until the case is completely settled, until you have been indemnified. Keep the part. Don't let it out of your possession. That could be exactly what everything hinges on. So, needless to say, that we actually, I called him and I said, "Look, we still have the part." And I took a little video. He took a little video of the faucet not being able to be turned off. And I'll be dang if the insurance company, the manager of this point in time, sends me a thing and says, "Well, from the video you sent me, it was obvious neglect because with it running like that, they would have seen it. You could have turned the water off. You wouldn't have had this much damage." And I'm sitting here thinking to myself, did you not read the report where it says the man wasn't home? His daughter was coming by and, checking on his house. He wasn't home. This is the clear definition of sudden and accidental, and there's coverage for that. That's standard. So I tell him, and so I send it back, and I said, no, that's not the case. He wasn't there. And then I get him with some more, statutes of you're delaying, you're not indemnifying your client. This is wrong. Okay. So at this point in time, they finally return the man's personal property, and they're still all out denying the claim. What I'm going to end up probably having to do, and I'm going to have to see if they'll come out and do a reinspection and then reevaluate it. If that doesn't fix anything, then we would have to take next steps, and that's why you hire a public adjuster. Yesterday, I had an interesting day. It was a long drive. Went out and I ended up climbing a roof, and I met with with some people, and I was looking at some older damage. Thank you. Come meet me, bro. Appreciate it. All y'all that are joining me this morning. Hello. So was on a roof yesterday, and there's it's a painted metal roof, and there's obvious hail damage. And I don't, at this point in time, haven't had the opportunity to look into the policy for any sort of cosmetic exclusion or things like that. But I'm looking at the basically, the paint. I had a roofing company that asked me to just come in and kind of give them a little bit of a, my opinion, for lack of a better term, on, if there was even worth pursuing anything. And at this point in time, you've got a painted metal roof, the voice of the voiceless. Good morning. You've got a painted metal roof, and you've got hail damage, and you've got obvious hail spatter where it took the paint off. Well, if nothing else, even with the cosmetic exclusion, you would delve down deep. It would have to be painted because that's been damaged where it's actual damage. It's not cosmetic at that point in time. I get it that they may be able to get out of repairing the metal, but they would have to go back and paint, in my opinion. But in this point, there was a lot more damage. There was a lot more collateral around, and so I really don't see an issue with that one as far as moving forward. But you never know. I mean, I've had complete video. Good morning for all of y'all that have joined me. I've had video of the event. I've had the actual insured give me a, you can see it bouncing off their house, and they kept some of it. And not only would they not bend on their denial, but they flat out doubled down and said, we don't even need to do a reinspection. There's nothing that you've sent me that shows anything more than what we have. And I was completely blown away with the video, because at that point in time, video is hard to get around. Okay. And if it goes, for example, if it ended up going to litigation, how are you going to argue, with the video bouncing off of the man's house and him saying, this was the day that it happened? People are just, it boggles my mind sometimes of how the responses are. But again, as I've told the gentleman yesterday, thank you, Jules, all y'all that joined. As I told the gentleman yesterday, a lot of this is the luck of the draw of the adjuster that you got and their skill set and their knowledge that they understood when they came into the process. And if they are new and don't know a lot, you may not get very far. You may get somebody that's actually reciting stuff that's not exactly true. For example, on a previous episode where I had stated where I had an adjuster told me that there had to be a hole in the gutter for it to consider damage, functional damage, and that's just not true. That's just not true. But like I said, when they were telling him, you could have prevented all this damage, he was on vacation. Who was going to prevent the damage? The cat. There's nobody there. But not reading everything, and the automatic. That's what gets me the most is the automatic response to say no. But a lot of the adjusters are, they have to be careful if they overwrite or they say, Michael, good morning. If they overwrite anything or they can be reprimanded. Okay, they can be. Excuse me. It affects their status as far as. So they have to be very careful not to not to give you more than what their guidelines say, and their guidelines is the problem. In my opinion, a lot of that is the problem because all the insurance companies, they come in and they bring a lot of adjusters. In my opinion, the bigger insurance companies on the floor, the ones that actually answering the phones, the one doing the grunt work, they don't want necessarily adjusters out there that are going to question these things. They want people that are going to, they've trained up and they've told what they need to look for, how they need to policy it, and they give them, like I said, these guidelines, and they tell them this is the law. And again, that's just not true. That's just not true. Okay. The company guidelines that you have no privilege to is not law. Okay. And so that is where you'll hinge on getting it done. Good morning to all y'all that have joined me. I appreciate it. So, for example, like I said, in reference to this, they're holding his personal property. They finally did return it, but they're still saying no. They're still saying it's a long-term water leak, which is just not going to be okay. I get into little different things in reference to shingle roofs. I've got another one that I looked at. I was sent, and it's small hail. Okay, it's not very large hail, but it's there. I was on with a field adjuster, very experienced, 20 years, very knowledgeable person, and so. But what had happened was there had been two roofers up there before me, and apparently, they were marking what I would call heat blisters or mechanical damage. And the adjuster had climbed up there and had seen the marks, two different colors, and very well on every slope, documented this and that and the other. And it wasn't, most of the damage she was looking at was, good morning, Carol, was not actual damage. And so a lot of times, and it shouldn't be the case, but a lot of times the adjuster at that point in time will they'll kind of cop an attitude and say, well, there's nothing up here. They're looking at what you called them out there to look at. You put your representative up there, whoever the roofing company said they were going to do a free inspection, which is usually what a lot of this does. It's a free inspection. Sorry for any of you roofers that are out there. You need to be marking actual damage that is recognized by the insurance company. If you don't know what that damage looks like, you can reach out to different folks. It's hard necessarily to do it from a photo. And I've said this before, but if I've been out there and I've done my inspection and I know that hail's out there, then my thing in reference to like the gentleman I was talking about, you call for a reinspection and you bring the adjuster out there and you show them. In this case in particular, that's exactly what happened. I climbed up on a roof and are these your chalk marks? No, those are not mine. That was kind of interesting because I use this really cool neon green chalk, and it's I had a real cool roofer up in Washington, D.C. had introduced it to me many years ago. And this stuff just lights it up like Dallas. It is just awesome. But all my chalk marks were gone. And so I told the lady, I said, well, let me see if I can find, where I knew where I had been looking. And so I went back over there and I went down. And the biggest thing with hail for all you that are, if there's adjusters and roofers in particular, and even the homeowners, if you climb up on your roof, and I wouldn't recommend it unless you are knowledgeable and skilled with climbing roofs, because it can be, the ladder is the most dangerous job we use. But when you run your finger across a hail hit, you can feel the dimple. I mean, you just can't. And that's how, when I know for a fact I've got damage, and if I called for reinspection, I could show them that. So I brought the that's awesome, Big Stinker. Good morning. So I brought the lady over and I said, hey, I said, do you agree this would be a hail smack? Because this is what it feels like to me. And she said, yes, absolutely, this is hail. And she started to make her 10 square. And I said, well, would you like me just to back off? Because you don't want to, some adjusters are really cool with you being around. Some of them are not. And she said, no. I said, well, you want me to see if I can find any more? And yeah, no. And I didn't have any chalk in my hand, so I wasn't chalking anything. I'm just, just identifying it. And so I went ahead and I identified several more. Well, she did her 10 square. And at that point in time, during a 10 square, I'm still looking for hail. And every now and again, I would rub one that was not inside of her 10 square. And it was funny because she would go, well, yeah, that's not inside of the 10 square. And at one point in time, I actually, stated, I said, you do know that 10 square is not enforceable, right? I mean, I get it. It's a guideline. It's an industry standard, more or less. But there's nowhere in the contract that your roof is specified that it has to be so many hits inside of a 10 square for it to be considered damage. That's just not there. Okay, and this is where it gets tricky with the roofing companies. And I was talking with some very good roofers yesterday, in particular, about this. I got, basically they've got a bunch of where they're telling them no, and so we were coming in and trying to explain to them, and they gave me different scenarios, and I gave them the answers to how you would move forward once you hit this brick wall. Well, what they found was this roofing company in particular is very, very they're hiring independent. Well, let me rephrase this. They're either hiring independent adjusters or they're training them in that fashion, so they have that level of knowledge. The issue that you run into with the insurance company a lot of times is only the insurance company, a insurance attorney, or a licensed public, well, there's no unlicensed public, but only a public insurance adjuster is legally authorized to look at your policy. So, for example, when they tell you that there's a metal, endorsement or exclusion from that, to get around it, to deal into it farther, or in reference to like the 14-day long-term water loss, leak, what have you, you have to be able to legally read the policy and interpret this to the insured, and then go back to the insurance company and say, hey, Jacob Sharkey, good morning. So when you go back to the insurance company, I mean, unless you're able to read the policy and prove, like I said with the lady that with the hole in the gutter, you got to have a hole in the gutter for it to be functional damage. Get away from me. Where in the policy does it say that? Where in the policy does it say that it has to be a 10 square? Nowhere. These things do not exist. I mean, they just don't. At this point in time, that's just not where it goes. And so since it's not in the policy, it's not enforceable. If there's damage, there's damage. Okay. You get some of the, and I like some of you got some of the collaboration companies. For example, if you get a plumber and a water mitigation company and a restorations company, and they all work together, some of those are great. Some of those are very, very great. Some of those, they're working hand in hand and they're doing a handshake deal, and it's like, this is an income. People are, so when I said you want to be careful about, the construction that goes on in your house, be fully aware. Ask the questions. It's your house. It is absolutely positively your home. It is your most prized possession. You have every right to ask whatever question you want to. And the insurance company is supposed to be the resident expert on your policy. And if they send one of their preferred vendors out, again, they're supposed to be a vetted, qualified, competent person coming out to your house. But know this, again, as I state, I cannot repeat it enough. If you don't feel comfortable with the people working in your home, you don't feel comfortable with the work that's going on in your home, stop it. Absolutely say, just stop, put this on hold. I don't understand what's going on, and ask the questions. Ask the questions. And if you're not getting the answers, you reach out to a public adjuster and see if they can, you might be able to just get a 5-10 minute conversation and find out whether or not we can help you or not. Most of us don't want to be involved unless there's something that we can do to help. I mean, that's just absolutely positively the way it works. We work on contingency, so there is no fees until we are getting you paid what you're owed. And again, that's another thing that needs to be clear in reference to what we do. We're not doing anything more. We're just getting you, Scotty, good morning. We're not getting you anything more than what you're owed. Everything that we're getting to you, you should have gotten already. I mean, you shouldn't have had to went through these steps to get it. But unfortunately, in this day and age that we're in, if you don't reach out to a public adjuster, and it, like I said, if it gets over $10,000, you're talking 20 to 30% that you're not going to get, more than likely, without reaching out to one of us. And on $10,000, I mean, that's $2-3 grand. You do that every 10 grand, that adds up very, very quickly. So the best thing I can tell you is, Smiley, good morning, houseboat, is if you have a claim and you think you have a claim, reach out to a public adjuster close to you. You can message me. You can reach out to me on TikTok, Facebook. I'm also on X. You can call me directly. My phone number is 830-353-2969. Again, I work in the state of Texas at this point in time. If you were needing information from the outside of Texas, I do have colleagues, and the firm I work with works in many states. I work with a firm out of Bernie, Texas. JR Claims, they're a very, very reputable firm. Their reputation is impeccable as far as for taking care of the insured. So reach out to a public adjuster if you think that you have a claim, and definitely if you think that it's going to be over $10,000, and just see if they feel that they can help you. Because like I said, most of us, if we can, that's when I get involved. I've actually, I've had to tell insured, there's not, everything's done, that we can't, there's not a lot to go on. You've been settled. This is locked in. For example, on that water leak, had that been a long-term water leak, had not been sudden axle, with the faucet leaking and us being able to show that the faucet was leaking, that would have been an absolute denial. And when it's clear in your policy, there's nothing you can do about it. That very much is how they go on. If it's clearly defined in the policy, what they're telling you is covered or what's not covered, you're not going to get around that. I mean, they do that what they want you to know about is there where it is obvious. Lone Wolf, good morning. It is obvious. What they don't want you to know is, deeper in the policy. It's 20 pages, 24 pages, and it starts off with definitions. And most of us, let's face it, your eyes will start to glaze over. I mean, you just, you'll get 3 or 4 pages and like, okay, I don't understand this. I'm old, so we would say this is like reading stereo instructions. In this case, it would have been like the instructions I was trying to read for getting my podcast up so I could get out here and talk to you good folks and let you know what's going on. Claim Wars has derived from the fact that public adjusters are not known. For the most part, I think there's 10,000 or so plus of us across the country of 330 million. Why is that so? The reason that is so, good morning, Charles. The reason that is so is because they don't want you to know we exist. Okay, if you know we exist, we come in and we're going to, as I stated earlier, we're going to get you more of the money that you're owed that you're just not going to get without us. I mean, unfortunately, that is just how it's set up. like I said, I wish I could say that a lot of this, I don't think for the most part, as far as the adjusters that you're working with, the people that you're working with, I do know that there are companies out there that are very, nefarious, and their intentions are not. But the most that I've worked with, they're just going off the knowledge that they know. Okay. And so when I say that you're at the luck of the adjuster that you got, you're at the luck of the manager that you got. At one point in time, I got a real live story I had with a manager that I worked with when I was working at the desk, and the manager actually came to me. Excuse me. The manager actually came to me with a hail claim, and she was telling me that this is wear and tear. And what she was trying to do was she was trying to apply the wear and tear that you use when they were saying that the plumbing leak has been going on and it's not their responsibility. She was trying to use that to not pay for the roof. And what I told her was, unfortunately, that doesn't apply. Okay, the roof isn't. You can't look at the roof in the same way. And this was with their guidelines. You can't look at the roof in the same way that you would a water claim. The roof is exposed outside every day. There's events. It's completely wear and tear to a plumbing pipe and wear and tear to a roof is not going to be the same way you look at it to get that covered, or whether you don't get that covered. And at that point in time, I told her, I said, based on the reasoning that you gave me, I would never approve another roof that ever came across my desk. They would all be wear and tear. They'd all be, it would all be repairs. I would never, based on the reasoning that the management was presenting to me to use for saying that the roof was old, damaged, and it was, it doesn't add up. And it happens a lot, and that's kind of like with the one I was on yesterday. The people that I was working with are very knowledgeable and what have you. The company doesn't like the damage. They don't like that. It's an older building. Well, then they can depreciate it. And they can hold that money till you have it repaired to make sure that it is repaired. Okay. They don't get to just say no because the building is old. The roof is old. And it just got hit by a hail damage, and you pay your premiums every month. Every year they send you out the policy to read. That's the next biggest thing I'm going to get into later on another episode. Not knowing your policy is probably the biggest detriment, because you run into, I had a gentleman in particular that had a water leak, and actually it was kind of funny how this turned out. He had a $9,000 deductible for a water leak. Oh, well, no, let me rephrase this. He had a $9,000 standard deductible. He had a $40,000 hurricane deductible or wind deductible, which was just insane. And so with a $9,000 deductible, he had a water leak, and it had done, damage. And they came in and they said, well, it's about $10,000 worth of damage, and that's, you got a $9,000 deductible, so it was $9,000 something. We're going to give you like $800 something and go away. And he was like, this just doesn't seem right. And that didn't seem right. The policy also stated that he had a $10,000. That's what it was. He had a $10,000 cap on what they would pay out on the water leak. Now, I'm not saying that's not out there, and on the policy that he sent, it was very clear. And I told him that. I said, this is, as I stated earlier, if it's clear in your policy and there's no question that it's right there and anybody could have understood what was going on, it's really hard to get around that. But what I didn't understand with this gentleman in particular was, with a $10,000 cap on any sort of water, and it wasn't a water backup, because a lot of times they'll put a $10,000 cap on what's called a sub pump or water backup. But this isn't what this was. They were saying on a water leak. And I said, that just didn't sit with me right. So I mulled over it for a couple of days, and I called the gentleman back, and he didn't think he had a claim. And at this point in time, I'm looking at him telling him, if it's a $10,000 cap and you got a $9,000 deductible, I'm not sure what he had insurance for. You got a $40,000 hurricane deductible. You got a multi-million-dollar home, and it just didn't make any sense. And so I told him, I said, I would request a certified copy of your policy, just to make sure. I would hate to say that the insurance company would do anything and put something in your policy that they sent you that was not true. I just, I would hate to believe that. I don't think that they would do that, but just in case, ask for this information so you can verify that this is what it is. Because again, I don't understand what your insurance is covering. If a water leak's capped at $10,000 with a $9,000 deductible, you got a hurricane and wind deductible of $40,000. I said, so basically, sir, your house has to burn to the ground for them to pay anything out? That makes no sense. So he reaches out to him and he tells them, and they all of a sudden there's coverage. $60,000 worth of coverage. And it's like, he calls me up and he goes, Ken, you ain't gonna believe this, but and I don't think they ever sent him the certified copy of his policy. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. But they sent him a copy where it said that he had a freeze and a water endorsement where it did say that now he was covered. Okay, so now we have an endorsement in the policy saying that the little exclusion goes away, and now there's coverage. And so they went ahead and they applied, and they were moving forward with getting them paid out on the $60,000. Now I explained to him at that point in time, you do understand that even though they're admitting at this point in time that you did have coverage, even though they were initially telling you no, they're still going to short pay you. You're still not going to get everything you have owed. And at this point in time, he's understanding what's going on. And he said, yeah, no, I get it. Let me get the funds so they can't pull this back and I can start to reconstruct my house, because it was a lot of damage. It's probably close to 90, maybe $100,000 worth of damage. Again, this is a high-end home. It's $1.5 million, maybe. I mean, it's just a really nice home. So there's nothing standard. You've got oversized baseboards, you've got oversized crown molding, you've got drop ceilings and things of that nature. So I mean, this is not going to be $60,000 was probably low in my opinion. So that's just how it goes. So every week on Claim Wars, we're going to bring you these sort of live conversations. We're going to bring you knowledge that you can use. Hopefully, the biggest thing I'm hoping that you get from this is, if you think at any point in time that the mitigation company is not doing what they're supposed to do, or you're uncomfortable, have them stop. If you think the pack out company, because they'll come in and they'll pack out all your contents and they'll take them off site, okay? And then you don't have access to them. If you have a place to put them on site, that would be better, just in case, until you know for a fact that you have coverage and there's not going to be any issues. If not, it is what it is. Store it off site and then deal with that as it is. When the reconstruction company comes back in, again, be very clear with what the estimates are. Know what you're being charged, okay? Know what the insurance company, I used to tell this to people all the time, can I start the repairs? And I would tell them, if you are financially able to fix this without the insurance company's help, absolutely. The investigation's done at this point in time. If you're satisfied with the payout and, you're just waiting to get paid, then absolutely go ahead and contract and get going, and then you can reconcile any sort of differences later. You can go, if for example you find out you had to pay $50,000 and they gave you $46,000, you can do what's called a supplement, and you can add to that later. So there's nothing final until it's over. But the biggest thing with the Claim Wars podcast that I've got is I'm trying to bring you knowledge that you can use, and I'm trying to let you know that you have options. You have options. You don't have to just take what the insurance company says as final. If you think this just isn't right, and most of the time that's what it feels like. It feels like, in my opinion, what they've done over the years is they've made your deductible higher, 1%, 2%, and then they've got you scared. Like several people I've heard, if I file a claim, they're going to drop me. If I file a claim, they're going to drop me. So you're paying your premiums every month, regularly, okay? You're paying them every month, and you're worried about your deductible going up, and you're worried about them dropping you. If you file a claim, the insurance company is supposed to be there. So when you file a claim, that's what it's for. It covers and puts you back to whole. And at this point in time, in my opinion, again, what they're doing is they're making your deductible so high, and then they're paying you out so little, that they're teaching you don't file a claim. Pay your premiums, shut your mouth, send your money in. Don't file a claim. If you do have to file a claim, you're going to find out that you got to come out with, if it's 1% or 2%, and in my case, 2% would be $6,000. And you are required to pay that deductible. Again, for all the roofers that are listening out there, to wipe away somebody's deductible, to tell them that they don't have to pay it, that is illegal. You are committing what's called insurance fraud, and if the homeowner goes along with it, you are involving them in insurance fraud. And then what the insurance company can do is, if they think that you haven't paid your deductible, they can require proof that you paid that. And if you don't show that you have proof, they have options. They can withhold your recoverable depreciation, which, for those of you, if you're unfamiliar with recoverable depreciation, that is the money you get after you have everything repaired. And this is what I said earlier. If it's old house and it's an old building, they can depreciate that. They can hold. So it's a $10,000, a $20,000 estimate. Well, this building is 30 years old. We're going to withhold $10,000, half. I've seen them do half. I've seen them do more. We're going to hold $10,000 until you can show that you've made the repairs. They're going to request what's called either photographs or a certificate of completion from your contractor. Sometimes they want both. Sometimes one or the other is sufficient. A lot of that depends on the insurance company. The other, I guess, important thing I would know when I was talking about in reference to knowing what's on your policy, also know what mortgage company is listed on your policy. That gets to be a big deal. I've had insured call me and say, well, the mortgage, there's a mortgage company listed on it. We don't have a mortgage company anymore. You didn't notify anybody that. You didn't tell the insurance company that. You haven't told me that. And all your paperwork says Rocket Mortgage still holds the thing. And so, yeah, they cut a check to Rocket Mortgage. They cut a check to you and me. And so now we have to rescind that check and have another one issued. And a lot of times that'll delay the process. I mean, it can delay it weeks. I've seen it goes, 4 to 6 weeks before you got paid again. I guess the last thing I would say in reference to the checks is, if you end up having the mortgage company on the check, do not endorse it before you send it to them. Send it to them, have them do their endorsements, and then send it back to you. I've actually had an insured that just didn't think it through, and they got the check and it had their name and the insurance and the mortgage company on it, and they signed it and they sent it to the mortgage company. The mortgage company, according to them, signed it and sent it back. Well, now you had a live check floating around out there with both signatures, and apparently it was lost in the mail. At that point in time, we went into the mode to try and, just to rescind the check and make sure it couldn't get cashed. But then again, even if you get it all fixed in that aspect and it's all done, you can show that it wasn't cashed, and you can help them. You've delayed the process out 6 weeks or so in reference to, just for the simple fact of not knowing what mortgage company was on your policy. So that is very, very important. Know who the checks are getting issued to. All right. So I hope this was a very informative episode of Claim Wars. I'm starting to get a little bit of drinking my coffee here. Now I know why they always have water when they're up there speaking. This is my new, I talk a lot, but I hadn't done the podcast before, so welcome for joining me. Like I said, at this point in time, we're about to close this out. We do this every Wednesday at 6 a.m. I will be coming to you with different live things that I'm dealing with, different claims that I've dealt with in the past. I will be giving you information in reference to, like I said, what you can do, what your options are. And just know this out there. You have options. The insurance company is not a final say-all. That's what they want you to think. They actually, as a whole, 50%, and they know this statistically, 50% of the people out there, when they file a claim, when the insurance company says, no, you're not covered, won't question it, and they just go away. Okay? 90%, even when they're told that they have a claim and what the damages are, don't question what they're given. So you've got an entire industry. You've got an entire industry that knows, statistically speaking, that 50% are just going to accept the no. And then 9 out of 10 after that are going to accept what they were told. Now, in what planet does the industry, and what industry in this country is it that they're able to send the man that owes you the money, he owes you money for what has happened, he sends his guy out to tell you how much they're going to pay you, and without question and without a lot of resistance, it's accepted. All right, well, the contractor's saying it's $20,000, you're saying it's only 14, and they're going, well, that's, Xactimate or liability. That's what the estimate is. That's all we're going to pay. That's all we're going to pay. That's all you're going to get. That is not the end all. If you think that is, if you think that you're being wronged, reach out to a public adjuster. As I said before, you have to be under contract with a public adjuster for them to delve into your policy and give you any sort of information or any sort of representation as far as that's concerned. There has to be a signed document. You have to be under there. All right, so we're getting to the closing, and that's about it for today. I am so glad that you tuned in, spent a little time with me on pulling the curtain back on yet another round of what the insurance company's gymnastics are. Next week, you'll strap in. We're going to go through more on your deductible and what the Texas law really says and what your carrier wants you to think it says. We might even poke the bear a little bit on some engineering reports. I've dealt with those a little bit. This week I met a gentleman out there, a very nice gentleman. He was very knowledgeable in reference to windows. May give you a little bit of insight on what the engineers are looking for when they come out looking for a window. Just know this, the insurance company for the most part is not your friend. This is a money business, and there's a lot of money to be made. I mean, if I'm not mistaken, you guys can fact check me on this, the United States does $1.75 trillion a year in insurance claims. This is just, in insurance. This is just ridiculous. I mean, that is the amount of money that you change laws with that kind of money, and they know it. They know it. So we'll get into the deductible. Just so you know, if an engineer shows up in a brand new truck and a carrier logo and a clipboard, this is not going to be in your favor, more than likely. Unfortunately, you hope that people do the job that they're asked to do. You really do. Same thing with the staff adjusters that come out. You want them to do what's right. Unfortunately, they are held to guidelines that they have to follow, and sometimes, if they don't follow them, they don't get to work. They don't get to work, and so you'll want to tune in every week, Wednesday at 6 a.m. You'll grab your coffee, grab your policy, whichever you think you can understand the most. At 6 a.m. sharp, we will do another round of claim wars where we expose the truth, one event at a time, one storm at a time. Just so you know, I am Kenny Avens, the claim defender, reminding you to document everything, read your policy, and never take "we're not covering that" as the final word. That is just not how this works. Just does not. We're going to give one more little brief on this disclaimer that I like to. This podcast was for information and educational purposes only. Let me put this over here. Listening does not create a client-adjuster relationship. Representation as a public adjuster in Texas requires a signed contract under Texas Insurance Code 4102. All my antics and stories were for illustration purposes only. The views expressed here are solely for the host and the guests. They do not represent any state or regulatory. To work with me as your public adjuster in Texas, you must sign a written contract as required by law. If you need your help with any of your claim or you have any questions, if I can help you, reach out to me. Again, my name is Kenny Avens. I am the claim defender. I'm a licensed public adjuster here in the state of Texas. My phone number is 830-353-2969. I will see you next week for episode 3 of Claim Wars. We are glad you were here. Reach out to us on YouTube, subscribe, let us know that you enjoy the show. Any information will be most appreciative. Have a good day, and until next week, Claim Wars.